All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. Thanks so much for being here with me today. I'm your host, Nolan, and we have a lot of news to discuss. Big show today. We got a lot to discuss from yesterday, which was a major high-stakes White House meeting between Netanyahu, of course, the Prime Minister of Israel, and President Donald Trump. And there was lots of information to come out of this meeting. There was a major 20-point peace plan that the White House proposed, and that supposedly Netanyahu is on board with, though I don't have faith that he's going to stick with it, so I'm going to wait till I see it to celebrate. But there was also an interesting phone call that came out of that meeting, which we're going to get into as well today. That was very interesting, and it has a lot of people in Israel, specifically Netanyahu's right-wing flank in Israel, very upset, not only this phone call, but the peace plan as a whole. So we're going to be discussing the plan in detail. We're going to be talking about the likelihood that it goes through, and I'm going to be discussing my thoughts overall on this plan. So welcome back to the Quest for Clarity podcast.
Americanism, not globalism.
I am not a slave. I am a free citizen.
There should be no Federal Reserve System.
Only America first.
End all of these wars. America is trying to play empire. We want everything released, and you're actively covering it up. It's not America first to be pushing our influence in areas where it shouldn't be. We're run by people that don't understand what they're doing and don't understand the ramifications of the policies they're enacting. That's an incredibly dangerous situation. All right, everybody, before we begin, if you wouldn't mind going right down below this video and hitting like and subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. Also, if you could go to my Instagram, X, and Spotify pages and follow everything that I have over there, I would really appreciate that as well. But let's get into the news from yesterday. About midday yesterday, Benjamin Netanyahu arrived at the White House as part of his far too long stay in America, and he had a high-stakes meeting scheduled with President Trump about the issue of potentially reaching a peace agreement in Gaza and to conclude the war, and as Trump says, to stop the killing. And we're going to get into everything that came out of this meeting and actually everything that happened during the meeting, because there was a very interesting phone call that took place during the meeting. And we're going to start right there because some of the ramifications from this phone call in Israel are going to come into effect later on when I discuss the reaction from Israel to this plan. But during the meeting, Benjamin Netanyahu is essentially, this came out during the meeting, someone leaked this during the meeting, which, by the way, before we begin all the details of the meeting, I do want to say, beforehand, the White House staffers are leaking like crazy, specifically to Axios, but somebody in the White House, or a couple people in the White House, are leaking like crazy. They basically, before the meeting, were setting this up like it was going to go crazy, like it was going to be a Zelensky-type meeting. Donald Trump's going to go crazy on Netanyahu. They were saying that the press conference afterwards may not even happen if this meeting goes poorly. They were saying it could go off the rails, I believe was one of the quotes. So the staffers all day before the meeting were leaking to the press that that Trump is fed up, that Trump was going to put his foot down and basically scold Netanyahu. And this had the Israel shills in the media, people like Mark Levin, very upset at the White House for allowing leakers to talk bad about his prime minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. So that was just something very funny, and that's been a common theme, if you've noticed, throughout this administration. There's been a lot of leakers discussing the real truth behind the Israel relationship, and that Trump actually isn't very fond of Netanyahu at the moment. So that's just very interesting, and that was pretty telling, and kind of set the stage for what we were hoping to expect from this meeting. We didn't get everything that they were hyping it up to be, but we got some interesting things. Like what we're going to start off with now was Trump reportedly, and there's pictures of this, made Benjamin Netanyahu call the leaders of Qatar, the country that he just bombed a couple weeks ago, and apologize for the strikes they made against the Hamas headquarters in Qatar. Just for those who don't know, Qatar is technically a U.S. ally, and they house U.S. troops. They have one of our biggest bases in the region. So this strike was completely provocative. They targeted the top negotiators on the Hamas side intentionally to halt negotiations because they don't want negotiations. And they tried to basically eliminate all the negotiators and were doing it in such a provocative way that they were going to strike Qatar and not give the United States really any notice. They were notified as the strike was already too late to stop it. The reports were that Steve Witkoff, the envoy, called up the leaders of Qatar as the strikes were like already happening. So this made the United States very mad, justifiably so. Donald Trump not really on the record, but he was saying how upset he was. When he was asked in press conferences, he was saying how upset he was. But he really didn't put his foot down to any real degree. And just yesterday, he made Benjamin Netanyahu pick up the phone and essentially apologize for the attack and promised that he will not do it again and will not strike within Qatar again. So that was very interesting. That has people upset, specifically people, the right-wingers to the right of Netanyahu in Israel. Bezalel Smotrich put out a scathing statement, not only about this, but about the meeting as a whole. He says it was a diplomatic failure. We'll get into that article in a second because it's very interesting. But basically, the right-wingers in Israel don't want peace. They don't want to have any negotiations with these people. And they were upset that Netanyahu was even discussing peace at this meeting. But now the main point of this meeting was the 20-point plan. Originally, I believe it was 21 points, and they were going to negotiate some of this with Netanyahu at the meeting. And they got a 20-point plan that was then presented at the press conference, and it's been released to the public. So we're going to get into this in detail in just a second. But Donald Trump released a 20-point plan that he says Israel has signed on to, all the relevant players in the Middle East and Europe have signed on to, and now they are reportedly waiting on Hamas to accept this agreement. And he's giving them about 3-4 days, he said, today in a press conference, or to the media. He was walking by the media, and he said he's going to give them 3 or 4 days. Now, that's different from what the plan actually says. It says 3, so it seems like there's some flexibility there. But we're going to get into this in detail right now. I'm going to read the major ones. I'm not going to read all 20 points because they get pretty long, but there are some major ones that kind of outline the real basis of this plan. So point number 1 here, I'm reading directly from the plan, is Gaza will be a de-radicalized, terror-free zone that does not pose a threat to its neighbors. Number 2, Gaza will be redeveloped for the benefit of the people of Gaza who have suffered more than enough. Number 3, if both sides agree to this proposal, the war will immediately end. Israeli forces will withdraw to the agreed-upon line to prepare for a hostage release. During this time, all military operations, including aerial and artillery bombardment, will be suspended, and battle lines will remain frozen until the conditions are met for the complete stage withdrawal. Number 4, and this is the one I was just talking about, within 72 hours of Israel publicly accepting the agreement, all hostages, alive and deceased, will be returned. So that's the one I do want to talk about for just a second, because I guess Israel, just yesterday, they publicly accepted this. 72 hours, starting, I believe, yesterday, so they're on the clock. Hamas is on the clock to accept this. And it's going to be very interesting, because are they going to accept this in 72 hours? Because this basically, we're going to get into it in a second. This basically means full-blown surrender for Hamas. They will have to demilitarize and give up all their weapons and give up all their leverage, which is the hostages. So this, in many ways, is Hamas saying that they don't want to, that they would, if they accept this, they're saying they are willing to not fight anymore and they're willing to give up all their negotiating leverage. And we'll see if Hamas accepts this. It might be, at this stage, it might be too big of an ask for Hamas. And of course, I'm going to say it right now. I'm advocating, please, Hamas, accept the deal. I do think that if Hamas accepts the deal, that would be for the betterment of all its people. But I just don't know if Netanyahu, I don't think that we'll get into this after. I'm going to keep reading, but I think Netanyahu is going to continue his long-term strategy of poisoning negotiations. So let's continue here. Number 5, once all hostages are released, Israel will release 250 life sentence prisoners plus 1,700 Gazans who were detained after the 7th of October 2023, including all women and children detained in that context. For every Israeli hostage whose remains are released, Israel will release the remains of 15 deceased Gazans. And number 6 talks about the aftermath of Hamas. Once all hostages are returned, Hamas members who commit to a peaceful coexistence and the decommission of their weapons will be given amnesty, so they'll be allowed to live. Members of Hamas who wish to leave Gaza will be provided safe passage to receiving countries. And that's kind of that's where I'll leave it off for now. Actually, there's one more important part here. This is the part where Donald Trump says he's going to create a board of peace, and he will be heading it up, and some very bizarre people will also be involved, or one very bizarre person, I should say. This is point number 9 out of the 20. Number 9, Gaza will be governed under the temporary transitional governance of a technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee responsible for delivering the day-to-day running of the public services and municipalities for the people of Gaza. This committee will be made up of qualified Palestinians and international experts with oversight and supervision by the new international transitional body, the Board of Peace, which will be headed and chaired by President Donald J. Trump, with other members and heads of state to be announced, including former Prime Minister Tony Blair. And then it goes on to talk about some other pieces of work and which groups will be handling it, the Saudis and the French. But Tony Blair, one of the orchestrators of the war in Iraq, Prime Minister of England, or Prime Minister of the UK at the time of the war in Iraq, one of the main advocates of the war in Iraq, mass murderer, war criminal, Tony Blair, will be heading up the Board of Peace, a little ironic there, in Gaza. So I don't know where that came from. For my understanding, I haven't heard his name brought up in a while, so I don't know where that came from. I guess he's putting himself out there. He's making it known that he wants to be involved in this for some reason. Okay. A little concerning, I think. I don't know if he's the right person to be discussing peace with, but hey, we'll see. So it doesn't say anything specific in this entire thing about the establishment of a Palestinian state, but Donald Trump kind of implied during the press conference that would be an eventual plan. And this is the big problem, I think, with this whole thing. So Netanyahu has said this for years, and he just reiterated it back at the United Nations a couple days ago, that he will never allow the world to foist a Palestinian state upon him. He will not allow the world to create a Palestinian state next to Israel. He said this the other day at the UN, and he said this for decades. This has been the chief goal of the Netanyahu doctrine dating back to the 90s, the early 90s. So if Donald Trump now is implying that he would like to eventually see a Palestinian state, which I don't think will happen during a Trump term. I don't think that will happen in the next coming years. But if he's implying that this is going to be the first step towards that, I don't think Netanyahu will go for this. I don't think that once he gets back to Israel and hears it from Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, and all these radical Israeli nationalists, I don't think that Netanyahu is going to want to stick with this. Now, let me read this is what Smotrich had to say. Just hours after the meeting concluded, Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister in Israel, and one of the far-right ministers that Netanyahu has been forced to align with for political reasons, he had this to say after the meeting. And this is an article from the Jerusalem Post. Smotrich stated that agreement to the plan is, quote, an act of willful blindness that ignores every lesson of October 7th. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, Religious Zionist Party, voiced his opposition on Tuesday to U.S. President Donald Trump's peace plan, calling it a, quote, resounding diplomatic failure after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu agreed to it in Washington on Monday evening. Smotrich stated that agreement to the plan is, quote, an act of willful blindness that ignores every lesson of October 7th. Quote, in my estimation, it will end in tears, he added. Quote, a tragedy of leadership running from the hard truth. Smotrich's remarks followed his initial silence on the matter. He had outlined, quote, red lines to Netanyahu on Monday morning, signaling a potential move to leave the government depending on the meeting's outcome. So Smotrich is very upset at this, and he's made it known. Every time Netanyahu's even hinted at negotiating here, he has stepped in to stop that. Because he is one of these ultra-Zionist figures in the government that, for example, want to annex the West Bank. That he infamously now bragged a couple months back that not 1 ounce of grain will get into Gaza. That was back when they started the blockade. So this is the guy that Netanyahu has been forced to align with, and he's been forced to align with him and Itamar Ben-Gvir, the national security minister, because Netanyahu was faced with potential jail time for a corruption trial that he was going under a couple of years ago. He was very likely going to be thrown in jail and be a disgraced former prime minister. The only political faction in Israel that would side with Netanyahu is the far, far right, ultra-Zionist nationalist religious party in Israel. This is because they viewed him as a vessel, basically, as an empty suit that they could use to further their goals of, for example, annexing the West Bank, annexing Gaza, ethnically cleansing both of these lands, and establishing Greater Israel. So this has been the goal of, let's not take Netanyahu off the hook, though. That's been his goal for decades. But now in his time of political weakness, when he had to find anyone to align with, these were the figures that popped up to align with him and save him. But also, he had to make deals with them, essentially, that he would further their agenda in exchange for their support, in exchange for their political capital helping him out. So this is the state of things at the moment. There was also talks, along with the Tony Blair angle, there were also talks that potentially Elon Musk, this wasn't in the deal, but I've seen rumors that Elon Musk may be having some investment interests in Gaza afterwards. So this is also partially a concern, because a couple months back, there was the discussions from Donald Trump where he made the just random statement in the middle of his meeting with Netanyahu that they were going to be creating essentially the Riviera of the Middle East. They were going to be having all these big businessmen come in and make major investments into the land and make it into like the Miami Beach of the Middle East, and have all these high rises and make it a tourist destination, make it Abu Dhabi. And when I hear the name Elon Musk pop up, it's very concerning. And I do want to discuss the fact that Jared Kushner was involved in these negotiations. Jared Kushner, for those who don't know, is the son-in-law of Donald Trump, the husband of Ivanka Trump, and personal friend of Benjamin Netanyahu. He was largely behind the moving of the embassy last term to Jerusalem. And he has been very instrumental in helping create the Trump-Netanyahu alliance. He was very instrumental in forging that. And also very instrumental in the Abraham Accords that happened at the end of Trump's last term. So Jared Kushner, who was very involved in these relations last term, was basically brought back on board as an advisor and as a diplomat in this scenario to help forge this 20-point plan. And that is interesting to see, and I don't know that I love to see that, given that he was very much a pro-Israel figure in the administration last time around. So when I hear these names pop up, I don't love it, especially since Jared Kushner was brought up a couple months ago as a potential real estate investor in the new Gaza Riviera plan that Trump had come up with, Trump Gaza. So I don't love it. Let me be very clear. If this plan goes through, if Netanyahu is finally willing to stop the killing and stop the mass slaughter of these Palestinians and eventually go down a path to give them a state, I will be happy. I don't believe any of that's going to happen, though. That's my point. This has been the constant slogan. If you watch any debate about this conflict, the Israel-Palestine conflict, if you watch any debate, the argument always is that Israel's always ready to give them a deal. There's been 5 times throughout history they've offered them a state, and the Palestinians never accept. They always want to fight. They don't want any Jewish state. That's always the talking point, but none of that's really true. The fact is that every single time it was the Israelis who were largely negotiating in bad faith. For example, this is a reason I don't trust Netanyahu. Back in the 90s, Benjamin Netanyahu was involved in negotiations with Bill Clinton to potentially establish a Palestinian state. These were the Camp David II Accords. And basically, Netanyahu was caught on tape years later, and you guys can find this on YouTube. He's caught on tape. He's speaking in Hebrew, so he doesn't know he's on tape. He's talking to a family in their home, and he is bragging about the fact that he tricked Bill Clinton in these negotiations, that he poisoned the negotiations, put a bunch of poison pills in the negotiations to mess them up, make it so it's something that the Palestinians will never accept. And he also talks about, which is very similar to the other day, he talks about how easy the Americans are to manipulate. He says they're a group of people that can be easily swayed either way, and you can find this video. It's still on YouTube. Go look it up. He's very brazen about the fact that he thinks he can control Bill Clinton at the time and the American public. And essentially what the poison pills were in those negotiations that made the Palestinians, of course, not accept it because it was unreasonable, was that that Israel would maintain the right in the West Bank to claim which parts of land they could maintain control over military lands. And Netanyahu in this video is bragging that those military lands were up to him to decide. And he said that 90% of the West Bank was military lands. So they don't even get any of the land. So these are the type of maneuvers that Benjamin Netanyahu has been known for all throughout the past couple decades when negotiating with the Palestinians. And he's notorious for this. This is nothing new. So when I hear Netanyahu agreeing to a peace plan and pretending to be loving every minute of it when he's very clearly not, I do have some reservations about getting all on board with celebrating this, especially when we have a history just in the last couple years during this war of the Israelis breaking just about every ceasefire that's put in place. If you recall, just at the beginning of this term with Trump, before it even started, Steve Witkoff went over to Israel and was able to basically force them into a ceasefire before Trump's term. It was actually really good. I loved it at the time because this was seemingly a signal that Trump term 2 was going to have a new stance on Israel. Maybe they would step in and be tough on Israel and make this war stop. Just a couple weeks later, Israel just breaks the ceasefire and continues the mass slaughter of civilians, and then later on puts a blockade back on and continues the mass slaughter and mass starvation of Palestinian civilians. And that is why I don't really trust Netanyahu. We have no reason. Just don't kid yourself. Don't listen to people who say that trust the plan. Never trust the plan. Always be skeptical, because we have no reason to trust Netanyahu about anything. He's a brazen liar. In just his UN speech, he's made it very clear that he's an obvious psychopath. And there's no reason for anyone out there to trust a word he says. So don't believe a word he says until there's literally, it's pen to paper, done, closed. That's the deal. So don't believe anything that Netanyahu says. Now, do I think that Donald Trump wants a deal? I do. I do think Donald Trump wants a deal. I don't think Donald Trump actually likes war, which is why I get so disappointed and so frustrated on the show when I see that we have a new bombing campaign against the Houthis, or we have just broken the all-time record for bombs in Somalia. So that's why I don't like those things, because I don't think he genuinely likes war. I think he's trying to find a way out of this, and Netanyahu's making it incredibly difficult. And we know this because of the leaks. Once again, the administration people are leaking like crazy to the press, and this is what we're hearing from the inside. So what insiders like Steve Bannon are saying, that they're getting increasingly frustrated with Netanyahu because he's not willing to budge. So we'll see what side of Netanyahu wins, and we'll see which side of his party wins, more specifically. We'll see if the right-wing flank, the Smotrich and the Ben-Gvirs, we'll see if they win out and win favor of Netanyahu. And the bind now that Netanyahu finds himself in is that he has to kind of weigh the United States and the West versus his political alliances back in Israel. Because let's say he takes this deal and is willing to discuss with Trump. Does that mean that Smotrich, like right there, we have Smotrich saying that he's threatening to leave the government as a result of this? If that happens, does Netanyahu last very long? Are we going to see elections in Israel early next year, which is what's being rumored now? So this is potentially very threatening for Netanyahu's long-term interests as well. Am I supposed to believe now that after years of him being caught on hot mic, just bashing America and saying that he uses us as basically his cash cows, am I supposed to say now that he's going to value our relationship and he's going to think that Donald Trump's going to cut off ties because he wants to keep this going and not side with his political right flank in Israel? I don't think that Netanyahu, if I had to make a prediction right now, I don't think that Benjamin Netanyahu is going to follow through with this deal, because I think he thinks that the United States is much more likely to stay aligned blindly with Israel than his right-wing flank. Because let's think about it. You haven't heard Donald Trump make a threat like Smotrich just did. If Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and other right-wing ministers in Israel leave his government, then he's up for re-election. And if he loses that election, which he very well may, then he's up in corruption trials. He's facing years in jail, and that destroys his legacy. And his legacy now is the war president who slaughtered like 100,000 Palestinians. So I don't think, if Netanyahu's weighing his legacy out, which is what he always seems to be doing, if he's going to be making a legacy move in Israel, then if I'm Netanyahu, I'm making every possible decision to further my power. And why wouldn't he cut this deal off because he knows that he has his shills in the American government who are going to back it. Like Donald Trump said, this is the setup for this. Donald Trump himself said that if Hamas doesn't agree to every term in the deal, then you have our full permission to finish the job in Gaza. They slipped that in there, and I think that's a setup for them to make some excuse as to Hamas not completely taking 20 out of 20 points, and they're going to jump on that right away and allow Netanyahu to continue to finish the job in Gaza, continue his invasion of Gaza, and then that will further his political capital and support in Israel for an annexation of the West Bank. So if I had to make a prediction right now, I don't think this goes through. I really don't. I have no faith in Netanyahu, and I have some faith in the Trump administration, although that's waning because they have not been able to do anything with this war or Ukraine. So I'm waiting for something to hold on to here. I'm waiting for a piece of hope here, but I'm not seeing it at all. Because if I'm supposed to trust Benjamin Netanyahu and the Trump administration officials like Marco Rubio, like I don't trust any of them. So we'll see what happens. I'd be happy to be proven wrong on this. I'd be happy for peace to prevail. I'm rooting for it to prevail. I just don't for a second trust Benjamin Netanyahu because he has a long track record of doing everything. And we know this guy. He's done everything possible to avoid peace. He propped up Hamas to avoid peace. The Abraham Accords were intentionally to avoid peace with the Palestinians. So what am I supposed to hold on to here? His words? I'll wait till I see it. So that's where I think I'll leave it off for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe. And be sure to follow me on Instagram, X, and Spotify as well. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Have a good day.
Americanism, not globalism.
I am not a slave. I am a free citizen.
There should be no Federal Reserve system.
Only America first.